From Austin, Texas, I'm your co-host, Charlie.
And this is your boy Dre from Rockville, Maryland, and we have another guest from fair town of Rockville.
Hello, I am Warrior Rick Murs.
Yep, he is a buddy of ours, fellow geek, and we're here to discuss. We're going back to an older theme of ours that we first started with, sci-fi. And we wanted to discuss one of the godfathers of the entire genre of sci-fi, which is Isaac Asimov and his legendary series Foundation. We'll be talking about the first book in particular and the new show on Apple TV that's been very popular lately. And we each, some of us saw the show and read the book, so some of us did both, so we'll each kind of be talking about our perspectives on it and what we kind of think about it. So, Charlie, you want to get started with a little background on the book?
For sure, yeah. I read the book back in 2018, an excellent read, and basically the whole story kind of starts off with this really intelligent mathematician named Harry Seldon, and he's living in this futuristic empire called the Galactic Empire. And he's sort of developed this new field of mathematics called psychohistory, like psychology and history kind of put together. And it allows him to kind of predict the future of large populations with a high level of accuracy. And he predicts kind of this imminent downfall of the Galactic Empire and kind of this onset of a dark age that'll last for tens of thousands of years. So he's trying to kind of reduce this chaos, and he establishes something called the Foundation, as in the title of the book and the show. Mm-hmm. And it's basically this group of scientists and intellectuals and really intelligent people who come together to try to create an Encyclopedia Galactica, sort of a twist on Encyclopedia Britannica, trying to preserve the knowledge of humanity. And it's established on this remote planet called Terminus. And it's like the center of learning and technological development. And the book kind of explores through different generations the different aspects of the Foundation, and it's divided in the psychohistorians, the encyclopedians, the mayors, the traders, and the merchant princes. So that's kind of just a brief, very general overview of the book.
Yeah, and if any of this sounds familiar, I think the author took some clear inspiration from, the fall of the Roman Empire, actually. If you think about it, the idea that the Western Roman Empire fell, and then they fell into a dark age that lasted centuries, and knowledge was preserved in these sort of small, I guess at the time it would have been monasteries and things like that. This is the foundation that kind of maintains the collective knowledge of this higher classical age for posterity, for a renaissance to happen again, essentially. So you can definitely see some parallels there. I think that was definitely intentional on the part of the author. And then you also see over the course of the novel and the subsequent sequels, how this foundation on the edge of the galaxy, it was purposely sent there to basically not be affected by the goings-on of all the galactic politics and instability and things like that, to kind of be able to do their own thing and incubate there in silence, quietly. But then they kind of come into contact with these other planets on the outer rim, so to speak, not to use a Star Wars term, of the galaxy, who are less developed and have kind of fallen away from the Empire. This is kind of like how all these barbarian kingdoms in Europe, as Rome was crumbling, were kind of founded over its ashes or carcass on the edges of the empire. First Britain fell, and then the Gaul, Spain, that kind of thing. And there's definitely parallels to that in the book. And these, it'd be kind of simplistic to call them barbarians, but more traditional kind of planets, they conflict with sometimes the goals of the Foundation on the planet of Terminus, and there's a bunch of conflicts that arise between them. partly over religious issues and things like that, as we'll see. So it's a pretty interesting look at sort of it's based on our own history, but set in a galaxy far, far away, where you can use your imagination to create a much more vast kind of experience. And yeah, so to start out with, Harry Seldon, he sets us up. The foundation is set there. They set it up. Several generations pass. And then basically the first of these things called Seldon crises happen, where they reach a sort of a turning point where they need the advice of Harry Seldon, who has since passed away. They require his input and guidance on like what to do next, like what decision to take in light of the challenges that they have, that they're being faced with. And then the first one, they're being attacked by these people of Anacreon, which is like a nearby planet that has a problem with like the growing wealth of the Foundation and their teachings and everything, and they also want to take over land that the Empire is kind of neglecting on the outer reaches of the Empire. So Harry Seldon shows up in like a form of like a sort of a hologram in the book, if I recall correctly, and guides them on the next step to take. And at this time, the mayor of Terminus, the capital of Foundation there, is this person called Salvor Hardin, who in the book is, I believe is a male, but in the show is made to be like a woman. And do you recall what happened in this section, Charlie? Like the encyclopedist, I believe.
Encyclopedist. I haven't seen the show, but when Harry Seldon kind of appears, my understanding from the books is that he appears as kind of like this holographic recording, and I was going to ask you, in the show, is he like alive, like kind of artificial? Because in the books, I mean, I guess you could be let to believe or have the idea to think like maybe it's AI, but in the show, is he living in the technology, or is he artificially intelligent? Do they like download his brain or something in the show?
It's complicated, and Corey, you can since you've seen it, you can kind of shed some light.
Yeah. So in the show, it gets a little bit muddied because essentially, so for all intents and purposes, I've only really seen the first season. I haven't, and yes, I know it came out in like 2021, and I've only just now seen it. But from what it starts out in, I believe, like the year like 12,000. So it's like they call it EI. It's called Era Imperial, and then it jumps a year, and then 19 years, and then it kind of stays, and then jumps back. So there's like flashback episodes, but the way it works is, and I'm allowed to talk about this as a spoiler warning.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But this show's been out for 2 years, so if you're listening to this, tough luck. Essentially, so the character of Harry Seldon, played by Jared Harris. By the way, Jared Harris, fantastic leading man.
Oh yeah.
He essentially he creates this digital version of himself, and there's this thing called the Vault, and essentially this vault is basically his coffin, and this copy of himself explains what the actual function of Foundation was. So, and I don't know how this really matches up with the book, but in the show, it's not actually a safeguard. What it is that it essentially was to create a new civilization. And then after all the exposition, he kind of returns back. I think he just goes back into the vault, until the next crisis, essentially.
That's right. So yeah, like his purpose, his own personal purposes for the Foundation differ from what he tells the ruler of the Galactic Empire. And this is one of the differences between the books and the show, is that like in the show, the ruler is a king or emperor called Cleon, but basically he clones it. So 400 years ago there was the first Cleon, and then he basically cloned himself after that, so every successor of his is basically his clone, and there's no longer a natural dynasty. It's called the genetic dynasty instead. And there's always 3 of them. So basically they distill the clones at different kind of ages in development. There's one that's young. It's called Dawn. There's one that's middle-aged called Day. He's the main guy calling the shots. And then there's one that's older, in the twilight of his life, called Dusk, and they are sort of like a council of rulers that basically decide, the fate of the galaxy, the Empire. But there's the implication that like their rule is becoming stale and despotic, and they're not keeping up with like the demands of what's going on in the galaxy in terms of like all kinds of things, like the people's needs and new religious faiths and things like that. And that they kind of need to go. And Harry Seldon realizes this, and realizes that there's sort of like the rot at the center of this. He doesn't tell it to them directly necessarily, although he implies it. And he has his own plans for the Foundation. And there is a bit of a spoiler. I'm not sure whether or not to talk about season 2 or not, since Corey hasn't seen it yet.
Well, so fundamentally, is he AI or is he just like a ghost in the vault?
Oh,
or...
Harry Seldon. It's complicated. So in the show, he is sort of, it's like his memory. He's AI essentially, but with the memories of the person. In the show, Harry Seldon was killed by someone close to him on the on his project staff, his Foundation staff. And it's revealed that it was actually done like intentionally as part of a plan, but his memories are transferred into the vault, and the vault is basically a tomb made up of him, of his like basically atoms reorganized in some crazy way.
It's sci-fi. It's sci-fi bullshit.
Essentially, yes, absolutely.
It's cool sci-fi bullshit, but like at the end of the day, it does boil down to that. Like I know it's
he
kind of
reveals
probably
himself to the. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I don't know. All I was gonna say is it kind of does sound like a cheap cop out to say it like that, but it's like Dre said. It's very difficult to explain without if you have to kind of see it to get it.
Yeah.
Because what also leads up to this is. Like, it's a lot of like, because what also happens is like there's like the time leaps also mess with people. So we don't see events sequentially as you think. Like in a normal television series, you would see every major event sequentially. But because there's these time gaps, we get a lot of like the off-screen. It happened 5 years ago kind of thing. So that's kind of the issue with Seldon.
Yeah.
Is that a lot of this is talked, I believe most of it is just talked off screen, and then it's just you only see it, certain things happen as they're supposed, because like, and I think that's just the issue of television.
Yeah.
Is that you cannot show everything. And that's also why because like Charlie, if you watch the show, you'll notice immediately that there's so many more differences between the book and the show. But that's also the problem of the medium of television in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. I mean, I from what I've understood and seen of the show, I mean, it looks pretty good. So does he reveal himself to the Anacreons and everything?
Yeah,
in the vault?
At the end of
when they arrive there?
The first season, yeah, he does. And...
Interesting.
Yeah, but it's sort of at the very end, it's a very climactic, situation after a lot of people die and stuff like that. Right as things are kind of heading to like a climax, then he shows up at the last minute and kind of basically settles things. Not to get into too many details, but yeah. And then he's supposed to come back for a second crisis and the third eventually. These things occur every few generations. And I will admit, the whole time jump thing, it wasn't done as like elegantly in the first season. That's one of the complaints I heard about it. They addressed that a bit more in the second. It's a little more coherent, I think. But yeah, there's it's like Salvor Hardin. First, I'll start with this girl, Gail Dornick. She's like the initial main character, who is like a mathematician under Harry's tutelage, who works with him on the project, and then is confused because he gets killed, and she's left to kind of pick up the pieces. But basically, she puts herself in like a cryogenic sleep pod and kind of ejects herself into space, but is preserved for like 100 and something years, and then at the beginning of the second season lands on her, I believe, home planet, and meets Salvor later. I'm not going to get into too many more spoilers than that. In the book, actually, that was
interesting.
Not
in the book, she's
Sorry, go ahead.
In the book, she's like initially Selden's biographer. Was she presented as Harry Selden's biographer in a way in the show as well?
In that she's like telling his story. I think it's implied, but it's not like explicitly said that's the case. It's not like her profession. She's a mathematician, and one of the interesting quirks was that like she would. As a way to calm herself down, since she's sort of like this genius mathematician, she would basically count prime numbers, and she's like counting like 8,500,673 or something like that, and then she keeps counting prime numbers over and over again as a way to kind of calm herself. But it shows how good she is with numbers and everything, and she's almost as good as Harry. I forget, in the book, they talk about the space elevator on the capital planet of the Galactic Empire, right? If you recall, right? I think in the first scene, kind of like Gale was going up the elevator.
Like, but it's more of a tether or like some sort of cable, right? That makes them go up, which I guess kind of makes sense. And it's it seems like it's a good transportation system, like the payloads and everything, to get them into space. I mean, I've seen kind of going off topic a little bit, like what would be the effectiveness of creating like a space elevator, like in real life. You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't know if that's like another MacGuffin, like Corey was just explaining, but do you think something like that? So did that appear in the show too?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you recall, that was like one of the first scenes. These terrorists from this fringe world in Acreon, they bomb it and take down this massive tethered like space elevator thing, and that causes the Empire to retaliate by destroying most of their home planet, and that kind of leads up to a bunch of drama later, because that's right next to where
that's how the
foundation is. Yeah,
because in the show, so the way the show starts out is it's Harry Seldon, and he's like, oh, I've solved this incredibly complex mathematical equation, and he gets rewarded for it, but then they're arrested.
Yep.
Because Seldon's model essentially says, yeah, this whole thing is about to come crashing down around you, because we've just been stagnating, because all we've done is have clones. And then they also arrest, one of the other main characters, Gail Dornick, because he essentially is like, hey, I need you to basically discredit psychohistory. He's like, you need to just say this is all bullshit.
Yeah.
But then, she confirms his model, but that's when, the space elevator is destroyed. And that kind of, kicks off the need to, Like, then they both essentially get exiled to Terminus, where they had to build the foundation. It's where it's supposed to start.
Yep. Yeah.
So the whole
interesting.
thing is like predicated on that terrorist attack, and a series of just a whole series of coincidences. But it's good. It was a very good, solid first episode. And I go back to an earlier statement where I believe that the issue of television and books that become TV series is that you're never going to be able to get everything. So there's probably a lot of subtleties and details that Asimov describes in the books that just cannot or would not be translated into television. It kind of reminds me of, what's it called? Sorry, The Expanse. In the sense that The Expanse is also based off of a series of sci-fi books, but not everything from the books make it into the show, else that show would be a thousand
I've never
episodes
seen
long.
that show either, or the book.
It's a great show, yeah. It's, I mean, the ending was a little disappointing, I'm not going to lie, but
I mean,
the ride was good, man. Yeah.
Oh, the ride was excellent. When the ride was good, the ride was good. And
Yeah.
I think also that might be Foundation's potential downfall. The ride is good so far, but
And it gets better, I'll tell you.
and I hope it gets better. But it's kind of like not to drag this into drag on about this, but look at The Boys. Has everyone seen The Boys, right?
I've seen a good amount of it. I'm not sure, Charlie, if you've watched that.
No, I don't think I've seen it.
Then okay, you know what? I'll use movie instead then. Well, no, you know what? No, we can still do that. Simpsons. Simpsons. Right. Everyone always says the same thing. The first 6 to 7 seasons are considered the golden age of The Simpsons, essentially.
Oh yeah.
Past that, it gets a little bit weird, and then everyone talks about the dip in quality. However, these last 3 seasons, from season 32 to 35, have been some of the better ones because they've done more character development. And I think that's the issue with it. Like, I only use them as an example because series like The Foundation tend to not make it past 3 to 4 seasons. Anything past the first season, I consider luck, because a lot of TV lately has come under this issue of, well, we got a first season, but it was only streamed. You guys didn't hit your numbers, so bye-bye. But I think season 1 of The Foundation justifies season 2. I'd have to see season 2 to see if it justifies. Like, did they get the renewal for the third?
I'm pretty
season?
sure they did. Yeah.
Because if they got the renewal, then here comes the next test. They have to make it past season 3.
That might be the kicker. Yeah.
And that's going to be another test, because I think the issue will come to how much of the books can they translate. Because, like, Charlie, you've read all 3, right? You've read the original Asimov trilogy?
I just read the first Foundation. Yeah.
Okay, so I think the issue will be, how can they milk the other 2 books? And can they do it in a way that's entertaining? And that I do not know.
Interestingly, I just read, apparently just yesterday, they confirmed it's coming back for season 3. So this is pretty timely.
Oh, wow. Impressive, because we're not going to see that until at least Q4 of 2024 at minimum, or early Q1 or 2 of 2025 because of the writer's strike.
Oh, yeah. That is true. That has hit the industry pretty hard, but...
Yeah,
hopefully.
I mean, Disney just had to push back all of their movies. Like, their timetable is now completely shot.
That's big, yeah. I mean, I welcome a bit of a gap, because there's just so much out there to watch that I don't mind that there's a little bit of a slowdown, but yeah, I get it. Yeah.
So I guess
thing in the world these days.
I guess a good question would also be, do you think Isaac Asimov would like how his work is being translated? Because Asimov would... I have not read a lot of Isaac Asimov, even though I do know of him and I have studied his the stuff that I like. I do like it. I mean, like, I believe it was Do Electric Sheep, Do Robots Dream of Electric Sheep is like one of his most popular translated books of all time, even if people don't realize it.
Yeah. And then of course
Blade Runner.
Yeah, and then of course he did I Robot, which is actually a series that takes place in the same universe apparently, but in a very early stage, like 12,000 years ago, back when they still had robots or thinking machines, which is actually an interesting plot point of this one, in that there is like one robot left, this Demerzel lady who's basically the assistant to the Emperor and has been made to serve them for thousands of years, but she's like the last relic of this earlier age. Anyway, the iRobot is famous for the 3 laws of robotics. Like what is it, like they cannot hold on.
I'm sorry, I was wrong about the book. Do Robot Dream of Electric Sheep is not Asimov. That is actually that's Philip K. Dick. Whoops.
No big deal.
The basis for
no, but not my nerd credit. All the nerds listening to this are just going to revoke my card.
You're thinking it's very much in the same genre. I mean, Philip K. Dick is incredible and influenced things, and I think he was friends with like Stanley Kubrick and
Robot Dreams. That's what I'm thinking of.
So the 3 laws of robotics are like a robot may not injure a human being or through an action allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must first obey orders given to it by a human being, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And finally, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. So there's an element of self-preservation, but humanity still has primacy there. And that definitely
isn't it? It's usually to protect, to obey, and to preserve, right?
Yeah, essentially, and that's been a pretty influential thing. I mean, as AI and stuff has taken off, these things are coming back into the sort of consciousness and parlance. I mean, it's always been a huge part of sci-fi, anyway. And obviously, we know of there's a movie with Will Smith, a take on iRobot. It was kind of decent. But that does become a part of this show, and there's little kind of bits of it that are snuck in the second season in an interesting way, almost as like Easter eggs. And yeah, but as far as whether Asimov would like this, so it does deviate a good bit from the books. Given that the books are written in the 50s, the style was different, and I think might not be as amenable to modern audiences in some respects. A little bit of a slower burn, a little bit more of a detached perspective in describing things, in the way that Tolkien, I think, had to be adapted a little bit, although it was done very artfully by Peter Jackson. But I think he would like that the spirit of what he wrote about was still definitely in there and informing a lot of the choices they made for it. So in that respect, yeah. And it definitely takes an interesting new twist on some of the issues he was trying to write about as they kind of pertain more to our own time, maybe. So I think so, yeah.
What I do think is interesting is that this is not the first time we've seen an adaptation of Asimov. iRobot, of course, Will Smith. But even before, I believe it was even before iRobot, it was The Bicentennial Man, which was in the 90s, which is an adaptation of The Positronic Man, which is itself based off of his original short story. I think it was a novel or a novelette called The Bicentennial Man. So it's interesting to say that we're talking about Isaac Asimov adaptations when we've seen 2 adaptations of this already. And again, the Positronic Brain was written by Asimov, which again was based off of his original story, The Bicentennial Man.
The Positronic Brain, didn't that also influence Star Trek in some ways, of the android Data and whatnot?
Well, what's funny is that Positronic actually it shows up much earlier than people think. People think it's because it's a fictional. I believe it was created by Asimov himself. If I'm not mistaken, it's originally conceived by Asimov. And then it's just been used by so many people a Star Trek. Yes, iRobot. Incidentally, Abbott and Costello Go to Mars. They talk about a positronic brain.
Oh shit! Oh, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
and that's 1953. The Abbott and Costello go to Mars. They talk about a positronic brain, so it's like you can see that like Asimov influences in a lot of things. It's weird.
Crazy, yeah.
I know.
Wow.
Yeah,
But,
right on.
I need to watch Bicentennial, man. I haven't seen that in so long.
That's with Robin Williams.
I think it'd be really cool.
With Robin Williams, yeah, and it's based off of his book. And I think that was a fairly reasonable adaptation of it. There's a lot of similarities in the Positronic Man that the Bicentennial Man movie copies. So if you want to talk about like fate of like how he might have felt about it, he might probably feel more positive about Bicentennial Man / the Positronic Man versus maybe Foundation.
I can see that.
Sorry, I kind of went on a tangent there, a little bit of a rant, but like
all good.
A lot of connections.
That's what we do on here, yeah. Because it's not, yeah. It'd be kind of lame if we just talk about the thing itself. We talk about its like context in like popular culture, and that's important.
Now, the other question I was thinking of is, and I want to hear your all's opinion. Do you think that the abundance of sci-fi movies and TV shows, with Foundation being a very good addition, do you think this will add or subtract from like a potential like malaise of like overabundancy of sci-fi TV shows? Because there's a lot of them coming out now. Like I'm sure.
I mean, there's just a malaise of TV shows. I feel like.
Yeah.
Well, when I say malaise, I'm like. It's more like this uneasiness. It's like it's a general feeling of discomfort because I feel like people are just getting burnt out on a lot of pop culture. I think we're starting to see that with Marvel's less than stellar movies they've been putting out lately. I think like there was a fatigue for sure there. So I guess really it's not more of a malaise or a discomfort, more of like, do you think we're going to enter a time of like sci-fi fatigue?
Don't even get me started on Marvel. They jumped the shark, I think, to some extent.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. I probably agree with you. There will be some fatigue. I think there's probably already fatigue, not just in sci-fi. I mean, basically, because then who's the main audience of sci-fi is kind of the way you need to analyze it. And what would be their incentives to just keep on watching these new sci-fi shows?
I think you're right there. Because, like, and I don't know, Dre, I want to hear your thought on this, too, because, for instance, I'll use these two examples. They just did, what was it? Star Trek Strange New Worlds. They just had season 2, I believe, was this year. And people for a while have kind of been heavily complaining about Star Trek. Star Trek Picard really got... Like they really laid into that show, and then I think it was Star Trek Discovery was also heavily criticized in its later seasons.
That's right.
And people like looked at that and were like, can we not do Star Trek? But then Star Trek Strange New Worlds comes out, and everyone was like, oh, it's about Captain Pike. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So I think. Yeah, for Picard, the first 2 seasons were not that good. The third and final one was actually a decent wrap-up, I think, because it harkened back to a lot of what kind of worked in older Star Trek and gave people a sense of that, like, TNG era nostalgia, for better or for worse. And I think Strange New Worlds also kind of delves into that a bit, and that it goes back to the era of, like, Captain Pike, who's a contemporary of everyone's favorite captain, Kirk, and that whole era. And they do it in a more, Star Trek-y kind of way, for lack of a better word. They kind of lean into that more classic feel. And Discovery, I haven't seen a lot of it. I don't know. It's trying to be more modern, but some people like it, and I don't knock them for it. It's not for everyone, I think. As far as the general like malaise and sci-fi, I don't know. I will say there's a bit of an overabundance. There's definitely some interesting things out there that are very thought-provoking, especially as we're entering this era of like advancing AI and all those other things. It's becoming more and more relevant and closer to being real. But there are some duds out there. I will say I enjoy the adaptation of Dune, and that's like the other great sci-fi sort of series, and there's a lot of parallels and probably influences from Asimov's Foundation. Like, for example, the whole not having robots around or thinking machines because of some problems with humanity in the past that they had to outlaw them, among other things, and being on a deserted planet in the fringe and things like that. With Dune, I've read the entire series, and it's a very deep, like, it gets into a lot of philosophy and metaphysics and political considerations and ecological things. It's very complex, and the only one that's really been able to be made easily into a movie is the first book. It's the most action-packed and, you know, full of adventure and conventional kind of storytelling. And I did like the recent one with, like, Timothée Chalamet. I know some people are gonna be up in arms about that because they only like the classic 1984 David Lynch effort, which, you know, it was weird and it didn't always work, but there's something beloved about it and, like, quirky about it, and I still like it despite all its flaws. Charlie, you're a big fan of that original one, right?
Well, I'm a big fan of David Lynch in general.
Yeah.
I admit there's a lot that is left to be desired in that Dune movie, but I mean, in its defense, or well, I should say in David Lynch's defense, the producer Dino De Laurentiis had final cut, and David Lynch didn't have final cut. So if you notice at the end, it's very, like, kind of fast paced, and it seems to be jumping around, and it's evidently because David Lynch didn't get the final cut to that 1984 edition, and you know, it seems like Dino De Laurentiis was getting to do the final cut.
Yeah, and it was very ambitious to try to fit it all in, right?
Tough. It's tough. Dune is tough to turn into a movie in general, and I haven't seen this new one.
Wasn't it also much more expensive? Didn't Lynch actually go over budget?
Oh, yeah. I mean, evidently, it changed cinema for sci-fi forever. I mean, they had 100 sets. They were filming in Mexico City. It took them a year to film this movie. Because, I mean, in terms of world building, I would say Dune is incredible. Like, if you're just looking at the world building of the movie Dune in 1984, there is so much to be said for that. It's incredible how many different sets they have. And I think David Lynch did a really great job, and I think that's, you know, the studio kind of took a chance on him with that, but I think that it also led to, you know, his increased career. He just kept on getting, you know, he did well with, I mean, I'm getting a little off topic, but like The Elephant Man, and then it allowed him to go do even better movies like Blue Velvet.
Oh yeah, great movie. Yeah, but
yeah. Let me shift topic just a little bit. I had read a number of years ago when I first read Foundation that one of the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, actually really liked the Foundation series, and he was interested in trying to create something through his political power that's akin to the Foundation. If we could maybe, like, not just focusing on Newt Gingrich, but are there attempts politically or, you know, through the study of history to try to predict the future of humanity? I think that's a big study that's been throughout history. You know, people want to, they discuss, like, how can we forestall the fall of America, or the fall in, you know, the 1800s. They were talking about the fall of the British Empire. How can we make sure that we don't, you know, do the same thing that Rome had to go through?
I don't think that. Well, one, Newt Gingrich, no accounting for taste, absolutely. But in terms of that, I think, and this also ties into the premise of it. I think that predicting downfalls of empires, regardless of the time period, I feel like all empires rise and all empires fall. It's not a matter of if, it is always a matter of when. We have seen this, I think history in and of itself, time and time again, has proven this. The British Empire rose and fell. The Mongol Empire rose and fell. The Greeks, the Romans, they rose and they fell. We've also seen that in more closely tied to modern days. The Ottoman Empire literally fell less than, 100 or so years ago, Dre?
Yeah, basically like a little over a century ago. Yeah.
Yeah, we saw a massive empire that stretched thousands of miles, encompassed the entirety of the Middle East, and it just collapsed in the post World War I era. It just failed to exist.
But it was a slow process. They're known as the sick man of Europe for a long time, so they kind of saw it coming. Yeah.
So, like,
although I think in retrospect, I mean, you could see, well, they made some strategic mistakes, like we in retrospect, you could kind of see like what the empire looked at in 1481. It's just kind of Turkey, the Balkans, and Greece, like the modern, and then it expands in like the 1560s, and then the 1680s they're really pushing up on Central Europe, and then they sort of recede a little bit.
That was the apex.
And then by 1914 like you said, World War One. But I think in each of those like falling apart phases ever since the 1680s, you could say, well, they had a really good system of like millets and dealing with minorities or majorities in certain part of the empire and dealing with them, but like they kind of moved away from what made them stable. So I feel like that's what Foundation is maybe getting at from a more practical perspective. And that's what like the British Empire wanted to like what can we take from like what's occurred in the past and try to analyze ourselves like from a third party perspective in the future.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe. I think like also like, and this is just like me saying this, but it's just like looking at it from a story perspective, like the idea of a collapsing empire and that you're trying to save it is a classic storytelling device. Because like, how many times have we like? It's not an unusual story premise of like, oh, it's a society on collapse. For instance, I'll use Warhammer 40K is literally in a grim, dark future where all of society is literally on collapse at any given moment.
Very bleak.
It's a very bleak thing. I think what differentiates Foundation's take on this is that it tries to tell the story, but in a much more interesting way. It's because it's a combination of things kind of slammed together coincidentally. Like, Isaac Asimov kind of like creating it on his own, but then like, of course, a lot of things they've updated for a modern audience. So it's like you see stuff like, oh, it's AI clones, and it's basically Rome but in space. It's not like these aren't. It's not like we haven't seen similar things before. I'll use Star Wars as a good example. The prequel series. In the prequel series, all comments aside, nerds listening out there, the prequel series is literally about the Republic on the collapse. It is a Republic that is failing in its ending. It's in its end stage. And it's just trying to keep this planetary system government alliance together. But it inevitably does collapse because of corruption, because of the rise of the Sith, and the weakening of the Jedi. But it collapses. Yeah. And people like seeing those stories because in the original Star Wars movies, all we know is that it's a galactic empire after the fall of the Republic. But we never see, or we're not really informed of why the Republic fell because, one, it's, George Lucas never thought about that. He never was like, and then Anakin Skywalker betrayed the Jedi.
Disputes.
Trade disputes. But people have wondered about that. Is like what caused the fall of the Republic, which was talked about in legacy media, like books, mainly the extended, or is it expanded, whichever the killed Disney legacy, the thing that Disney killed over legacy issues. But it's but like only until like he did the prequel trilogy did we learn why it fell. And it's like, oh, it's on collapse. It's already on its way. The Sith are just giving it the push. And I think that's kind of like, and I think I'm not saying Foundation is Star Wars. What I'm saying is that Foundation, I feel like it borrowed that bit.
Well, that bit was around. Obviously, it was written way before George Lucas came up with Star Wars, but I think it was also a different thing. So Star Wars was more about the transformation of the Roman Republic to the Empire internally. In the case of Palpatine, as we talked about on another podcast episode, his own kind of machinations in a manufactured war. the Foundation is more about the end of the actual Roman Empire, at least the Western one, and a takeover by less learned barbarians, and the threat of knowledge being opposed, and threatened by those forces of darkness and ignorance, so to speak. So similar theme, but a bit different, in my opinion. Also, compared to, I guess, Warhammer 40K, there is this element of, hope in the future in Foundation. Unlike in 40K, where it's just it's accepted that it's just a fucked up, galaxy, and that's just how it is, and there's eternal war. I haven't read all the books, but it's not necessarily always a positive how things develop. There are definitely setbacks and stuff like that, because Asimov was kind of a realist, just as Frank Herbert kind of was in his Dune series. Not everything is, where the hero wins, everybody's happy at the end. It tells a story over many generations of how things evolve, and kind of give us a warning about what could happen if we don't handle our own, situation well.
Yeah, I can see that. And when I said it uses that bit, I meant like how they're writing it in for a modern audience, not necessarily that Asimov. I'm not saying that Asimov didn't come before Star Wars. It's more like, I think the way they're adapting it is more in that Star Wars fashion of this is how it starts, because unlike Star Wars, though, we see this progression play out over, because movies you have to jump around further than even TV shows, but at least in the TV show we see it faster.
Yes,
we
correct.
See the clear decline of the civilization.
Yeah, and that's for sure. And then later there's more parallels to Rome, in that the General Bel Rios is definitely a parallel of General Belisarius from the Byzantine Empire. It's another topic that we covered in our podcast, so just a little kind of link to that. But that's the second season. He was a servant of the Emperor who was kind of against him, but he loyally served him despite his own views, and there's a lot of drama. Anyway, so... But about psychohistory...
How are we doing on time?
We're about kind of ready to wrap things up. Just a few more things I wanted to mention. As far as psychohistory, what do you think is the closest thing that we have is in our own society? Sociology, statistics. I mean, it's some fusion of all of these kind of disciplines.
Honestly, I think it's any predictive algorithm. I think honestly, if I'm going to point to one that's basically this, it's basically any algorithm on a social media site, if you think about it. Because it's basically saying we're noticing a pattern of behavior. This pattern of behavior is if all I do is click on cat videos on YouTube, YouTube's going to know this mofo, he's just into cat videos, so we're just going to put as many cat videos in front of him.
Right.
So and same on Twitter. If all I do is look at accounts that talk about cats, Twitter's going to instinctively go you might be interested in cats. So I honestly think social media algorithms are probably the closest to predictive behavior, at least in a behavioral sense. I don't know about predictive history sense.
Yeah,
but
that's bigger. But
it's interesting. I don't know if you guys
have predictive
have heard clidiodynamics. It's this transdisciplinary area of research on cultural evolution and everything, and just looks these dynamic of the social sciences and historical analysis. I'd looked it up somewhat recently. It takes a lot of data. I mean, very similar to what Corey is saying, but taking Google Ngram viewers of the most frequently set of words used, and just trying to get social complexity and how we evolve. So it's taking everything from mathematical modeling to structural demography theories. Clidiodynamics. It's very interesting. Yeah.
So some kind of amalgam of various...
is the muse of history in Greek, and dynamics is, just the dynamics of, things changing. But,
you could also say
but they evidently have, an origin in Ibn Khaldun, the Arab, philosopher. So I just think it's really cool.
I was also going to say you could look at machine learning as well. It's not AI. Machine learning is just basically a high-powered program that you tell it to just do one thing and one thing only. But machine learning can get to a point where it can tell, like, it's used in a lot of like private equity funds because they use it to determine when to sell and buy because their whole profit margins rely on like pennies on the dollar for high volume trades. But these machine learning techniques essentially are able to give you a best analytical outcome, essentially predicting the best path forward. So I guess that in itself could also be kind of seen as this psychohistory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, in a way, Asimov was kind of prescient about, in a very general way, about like some kind of developments in the future about how we would, try to establish patterns of behavior in the future. And yeah, I agree. Machine learning is definitely kind of a lot of people misunderstand it and think it's like true AI, but it's not. There's no actual thinking going on there. And it's part of what makes things like ChatGPT work and kind of be able to spit out the next best word that makes sense in the context of the prompt and the word kind of before it. And I
think.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say that I also think that in terms of. I think that it's also hard for us to, because like Asimov grew up in the age of like he would have seen three major things happen in his lifetime as a kid. He would have seen the advent of the television.
Mm-hmm.
He would have seen the creation of the nuclear bomb, and he also would have seen the first computers.
True.
Asimov, I think a lot of his writing was, and I don't know for sure because I'm not like all hyped up until like it's not like I've watched a documentary about Asimov, but I feel like if you're a person growing up in this age, and then when you're an adult and a writer, you're basically living in a time where, hey, we're creating this thing that can do complex calculations and spit them out at you and help us to do so much. I think that influenced his writing too, because like those early computers were massive.
Oh, the mainframes, that would fill up.
Yeah, like the early computers, like even the first models that would have appeared, because I think those essentially would have been like the first giant, like to put it bluntly, the first mindfuck.
Yeah.
And like you could argue that like the first computer was created in the 1800s by Babbage, but then like Alan Turing comes along and creates computer science, and then we get ENIAC in 1945.
Right. Yeah, because Babbage would have been more like analog and like punch card things like that,
Yeah.
And then it transformed into a digital form, and then we had the vacuum tubes, and they kept getting smaller and smaller microprocessors, so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, and then like I think it was like. Yeah, because ENIAC was like the first, what you could call the first general purpose computer, and that was a game changer across everything.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of lends itself to Asimov's ability to write like he did.
Yeah.
And I think like, I'm going to write a story where this guy uses technology to predict a complex algorithm to predict the fall of my society.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of this inspiration probably came from.
That makes sense.
I could be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's an inference because, I think people forget that a lot of writers are influenced by their surroundings, and people write what they know.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to kind of head things toward a conclusion, wrap things up. So we talked about basically mostly the first book, and there are parts of it that we didn't really go into as much. In the second season, there's an interesting thing that he goes into is that the Foundation shifts from being purely encyclopedist to kind of making a religion of their own, a false religion to kind of set up a narrative to keep things going and dupe a lot of the people out there, and that parallels Dune and other things like that, but that's kind of one of the big trends of the second season. And then they get involved with trading and things like that to kind of make the Foundation bigger and more powerful, and then start having issues, internal identity issues about what they need to be doing and all this, and that's maybe that could be discussion of a future topic at some point. And it gets pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. What else was I gonna say? So I guess that kind of wraps things up.
It's been a good podcast so far.
Yeah, we talked about a lot of different things and how they like affect our own, current situation and like its influence on all sci-fi. And yeah, any final words on this or anything? Or
I mean, it's a cool topic. I mean, it seems like, going back to what Corey said about this MacGuffin, it seems like it's just something that could really be plausible, and I think that's what really makes it such a good, compelling plot point. It's like psychohistory seems like it really could be potentially something. So I think that's what kind of is one of the biggest appeals in this story plot that Asimov created.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Corey, do you have any final thoughts?
Yes, you should all go watch House of Dragon season 2. It's way superior. No,
Oh, it's back. It's on.
oh yeah, season 2 is coming soon. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not on yet. I was making a joke. No, it's. I think Foundation is an interesting show. I like the idea. I think it's interesting that we're seeing adaptations of authors that 100% should be recognized, and it's kind of sad that it takes a TV show for people to recognize how truly great some of these writers are, but that is just the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
That's just like, the world we live in. I think, honestly, if you want to see a show that's kind of similar to Foundation, maybe not in exactly, but like I think that The Expanse is a pretty good one.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Yeah. Really good plot line. It takes place in kind of the near future in our own solar system, kind of the stuff that happens when we start to colonize Mars and asteroid belt and all that, and contact with extraterrestrial potentially life. So very interesting stuff. I highly recommend it. But as far as this, yeah, I guess that kind of wraps up this episode of the Charlie and Andrei Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
All right, signing off. Peace.
Peace.